Welcome everybody. Once again, we're here today with Gab, doing some more relationship work and talking about love and sex and all those wonderful, beautiful things that happen between people that are in love. Gab,
Morning.
you sent me through a article that you'd written on a plane flight back from Indonesia about being addicted to love and how that also worked with being a bit of a commitment phobe. Um, so do you want to share a little bit about that article? Sort of give us
Yeah,
a glimmer of what you were conveying to me, because I thought it was very interesting.
yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic. Tough at the time, but now in retrospect, it's good to look back on it at learning. Um, so I was married for 8 years, and then once me and my husband had split from each other, and I was going into a new relationship, some old patterns started surfacing from my teenage years. So in my teenage years, I found there was kind of like a lack of stability and safety in my external environment. And what that set up in me, I never drank, I never did drugs, and I was never a party girl. My substance abuse was love. So my way of making myself feel safe and stable during my teenage years was that I would externally look for attention from other people, and I guess I wasn't quite a happy teenager would be the best way to explain it. So my way of getting high was to get the high off attraction and off love. So it was kind of almost like an oxygen to me, Perry. It was the way that I would breathe and feel happy in the world, and I didn't really know happiness or relationships outside of that. So my husband was kind of my safety and stability in the world. That's why that kind of worked for so long without me needing any external validation. But once that came to an end, those patterns started resurfacing again. So I was trying to have a relationship for 18 months, and trying is the operative word. And I would find myself throughout that relationship just going, there was a war going on, and half of me wanted to have a committed relationship, but this other part of me was like a grass is greener part, and it was just constantly searching for that next high. Something really interesting was I recently helped write a book, and I was doing some research, and when you're addicted to love, it actually releases the same chemicals as someone addicted to cocaine. It releases oxytocin and vasopressin.
Yeah, I was smiling before when you talked about the addict and how you weren't into drugs and drink like the other young people you were into. And I was smiling. That's so smiling because you're right. It releases oxytocin
Yep.
and dopamine, and the one that you mentioned before I hadn't heard of.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that one that did the other chemical?
It's called vasopressin. Same in.
Vasopressin. Yeah. So just for everyone listening, that they all create joy within the system. They create good feelings. Okay. Anything else you want to share about that? Because as you talk, I want that just work I've done with clients in the past comes to mind, and that there's a part thing being set up, or some things that you can look at, not you personally, but anyone listening that's interested in the subject. There are aspects of the psyche that drive these different, the hunting of these different experiences.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you want to share more about that while we get into that?
Take it away.
So you were looking for the fairy tale, I take it.
Oh, absolutely. The fairy tale was what I was after. I guess because I didn't have felt that sense of safety and stability in my teenage years, that the fairy tale that you see in romance and in movies and romance and that kind of thing became the ideal. So this part that was so addicted to love and the grass is greener, it was searching for the fairy tale, and I wouldn't stop until I got it.
A question for you. Did you find yourself rejecting partners that you were with at all?
Oh, yeah. It was like,
for something.
yeah, so what would happen, the setup of that, Perry, was that I would go into the relationship, I'd be on the high, I'd see them as this perfect mate, But as soon as they started displaying characteristics that were anything against that, I completely reject them and run in the other direction.
Yeah, so the first thing, and then we're going to get into some of the setups, not for you, Gab, but for other people that are listening that may experience this. The first one is the romantic fairy tale is, I can tell from what you're saying, is all about perfection and the perfect partner. And so when the partner showed what you might have at that point considered imperfection, then you would run away. Now, I already know just based on that behavioural profile that you won't have accepted parts of you. So you yourself would have wanted to be perfect. Yeah, and not able to accept those parts that you would consider imperfect on that model. And then
I actually, there was a part there, just as a side note, there was a part there that was a chameleon. Yep. So the chameleon would obviously adjust my colours for whoever was my mate at the time, so that I could be perfect for them.
Of course. Okay. So as soon as the partner displayed imperfection, then that would be, well, I'm going to reject because I'm going to find someone that's perfect so I can have this perfect thing. Okay. Now, what we often see, and I'm not saying this was what was happening with you, Gab, may or may not have been, but what we'd often see is that if someone's got a lot of low self-worth, so they've got a strong low self-worth part, they grew up in a family where they weren't treated particularly well and they felt alone and unloved, and they develop a part that said, well, I'm not good and no one loves me. And that can be a really powerful force for some people, that part of the personality. And of course, they don't want to feel that. And why would they? So they sort of push it away, and they'll develop another part. It could be the seducer. And the seducer, and I'm just going to talk as though this is a woman at this point. She goes out and she starts to seduce men. And as she seduces men, and that doesn't mean that it leads to sex or anything like that, it could just be flirting. It's just, what's happening is that she's getting what you've just talked about before, the oxytocin release, the dopamine release. And all of a sudden, she can escape that low self-worth part. She doesn't have to feel it. She can go, look, I'm okay because these people like me. They're attracted to me. Okay? Now, what will happen if one of those men starts to really fall in love with her, typically as he starts to get closer to her, the low self-worth part that believes she's not worthy of love will usually pull up another part to reject him, because on the deeper level she doesn't believe she deserves love, so she rejects. And we start to have what we call a push-pull relationship at that point, where the seducer goes out to escape the low self-worth feelings, starts to pull the person in, flirt with them, and then as they start to get too close, this part says something like this: don't let them too close. This can all be unconscious, by the way, but don't let them too close because they're going to find out that you're unlovable, so the person will reject. And they might find imperfection in the person. They might find a list of reasons, well, he's no good because of this. The guy goes away, and then she feels lonely and abandoned, and she pulls him back in. And that cycle can go on in relationships for ages. But the key thing to understand here is how the parts work, because if it's a person with the low self-worth, the low self-esteem part, who's also got the seducer, they're going to use the seducer so they don't have to feel the low self-worth part, because as soon as they're engaging the seducer and they can see people are attracted to them in the seducer, that's what gives them their sense of self-worth and self-esteem. It's a kind of a dangerous cycle to be in.
I was just going to say, sorry, a good way to see it, I was just thinking to myself, a good way to see it is that for myself, I had the seducer.
Yeah.
But the good way to see it is, as soon as I got what I wanted from them, I would run in the other direction. So my conscious thought was, I've got what I want, I'll go now, and then I'll get lonely and pull them back in. Unconsciously, the undeserving. But a good way of seeing it is that if I was anything other than the seducer and pulling in that love, that means that I would have to meet my imperfection. So on an unconscious level, I realized, or would have realized, that meant meeting my imperfection. And I wasn't ready to do that, because that meant I had, the more that I owned their imperfections, was I had to own mine as well.
Of course, that's why I knew before that pattern would be played out. Because if you're looking at another person going, well, you know, I was in love with them, attracted, but now they're this, that, the next thing. Usually that shows an intolerance. Okay, and that's not meaning that you have to accept everything in another person, but if that's if you're doing that constantly, almost guarantee that you have a pattern, and that pattern, as you've just quite rightly pointed out, Gab, is your own judgment of your own imperfections gets put onto the partner, and you must reject them in the same way that you reject yourself. Now, I didn't mean it to go here, but you can see that intimacy itself can only happen when you're so okay with yourself, meaning you accept and love yourself and all those different parts, and that you love them, which means that you'll let other people in to see all those parts too, and that means your partner's loving all of you, and when you accept your parts, you're more likely to love all of them, and that brings relationships together. We're not hiding parts of ourselves in relationships because we're ashamed of them, which means that we're not fully showing up in the relationship, or we're pretending in the relationship. Yeah. But by the way, and just finally, we're at time, you know, I read something a little while ago and it really made a lot of sense. And it's like, when people come together in relationships, it's a lottery, because if they don't know their own unconscious dynamics, their own drives, because these forces bring us into relationship, and the person we come into relationship, if they don't know themselves and all the things that we're talking about today, the different parts, then creating good relationships just becomes a deep mystery and a lottery. When you understand this work, it becomes way less of a lottery. Way less. I'm sure there's still a lottery. You know, there's a bit of luck about who we meet potentially. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's the luck element. But then we're able to navigate relationships effectively because we understand our parts and what we bring to the relationship, that also helps us understand the other person. So the clearer we can see ourselves and our parts, the clearer we can see others. But when two people in a relationship understand this type of work, it just makes a huge difference to the type of relationship they can create.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that, you know, in recognizing that I had this pattern that was just seeking kind of like a shallow form of love, to be able to recognize the opposite of that, and to recognize a mature love, and coming to a place where I could accept my imperfections, because what it came down to is that I realized that there was this grass is greener part that was addicted to love, and then there was a mature part that really wanted a deep and fulfilling relationship. In understanding that, love became a choice, and love became about a lot more than just a high. So the experiences that I had in coming to that realization and then doing the work has given me a relationship that has far exceeded my expectations, and an understanding of self that, you know, that money can't buy.
Yeah.
It's just the work is profound and has just given me so much just in that choice.
Yeah. But again, when you talk about mature relationships and ones that are based on not just those good feelings, but loyalty, connection, being very good friends, commitment, going through hard times together, and being there for each other. They build a compatibility and very deep relationships that are incredible. That can have those love elements as well. We were talking about that before, Gab, before we came on to do the video cast, that you can have all that romanticism in the relationship, but it can be a really mature relationship that's been developed over time through deep senses of commitment, togetherness, and looking after each other, looking after a family together. All those things are incredibly bonding, and they go far deeper than some of the more joyful experiences, to be honest, of connection and love. There's a sense of a life partner, as an example. Yeah, completely different.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Gab, and I hope everyone got a lot from today. Anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, there is one thing that I want to say. Just, I guess, that being in that swing pattern with the commitment phobia is a really hard place to be, with that conflict part of yourself. And I understand how hard that can actually be. So for anyone that's watching that has this swing pattern of not being able to commit to a relationship, it's just about looking at what you actually want to achieve long term. And the beginning of that starts with a commitment to self and just recognizing the pattern, and then, you know, going to do something about it.
Yeah, good work. Yeah, very insightful as usual. No wonder you're such a good coach. Thank you. Okay, hope we got a lot from it. Talk to you next time, Gab. See everybody.